Hi fellow truth seeker, my name is Nadia and this video will be on the topic of joy and happiness. Raise your hand if you want to have more abundance, joy and prosperity in your life. We all do, right? So I was inspired to create this video on the topic of happiness so that we can utilize the wisdom we can derive from ancient astrology in order to have more joy, abundance, prosperity, and connectedness and happiness in all areas of our life. I've always been very interested in philosophy, psychology, self-help, and self-improvement, and I think astrology is one of the best tools to utilize for self-improvement and understanding others, ourselves, and the world better. So without further ado, let's jump into the 10 practical ways in which we can make our lives better and have more joy in our lives. The first habit we can work on implementing in our daily lives in order to have more creativity, abundance, and happiness is to act on our initial impulse. What does that actually mean? It sounds a little bit strange at first, so let me elaborate. Acting on our initial impulse means when we get a sudden idea, a sudden inspiration, a sudden impulse to do or say something, if we get a sudden aha moment that comes seemingly out of nowhere, we're supposed to take a note of that. We're not supposed to ignore that or think of it as something irrational or random, because this is actually a sign from the universe that you're ready for something completely new. You're ready to expand your mindset, your consciousness, and to transcend onto that next level. How do we know that in astrology? We know that because one of the representations of Jupiter in ancient mythology was God Indra. Indra was the god of thunderstorms and lightning. And basically, it's through lightning and thunderstorms that nitrogen gets into the soil. It basically transfers from the atmosphere into the soil, and it ends up enriching the soil and ensuring a better harvest. So that way, Jupiter is created to abundance, creativity, and fruitfulness. Jupiter comes to us in these kinds of lightning fast ideas, these decisive moments where something really changes dramatically, and we're not supposed to ignore these. Authors like Hemingway, any of the great authors of previous generations, or artists, musicians, you name it, a lot of them were often reporting that they would carry around notepads, notebooks everywhere. They would have them everywhere in the house in order to jot down any idea that comes as a sudden inspiration to them from seemingly nowhere. Of course, it doesn't come from nowhere. It's the power of your subconscious mind working behind the scenes. So you kind of feed your brain with all these beautiful ideas, with all the possibilities, with all the, richness of the human mind. But then all of a sudden, in the background, our subconsciousness comes up with something seemingly out of nowhere that is just the next level aha moment. You can think of this as following a good impulse. So for example, you're walking down the street and you see a certain person begging for money. If your initial impulse is to donate, you have to follow that inspiration. You have to follow that impulse. Remember, Jupiter also represents charity, right? Being charitable, being generous. It's a beautiful impulse. If you have the impulse to help someone, whether that be someone begging for money on the street, or you just see an advert for a cause that just really speaks to you, you just get this sudden impulse like, yeah, I really want to be part of that. I really want to donate to that. Or you see a kind of volunteering opportunity and you think to yourself, oh, it would be amazing if I could take part in this group and volunteer towards this worthy cause. You're supposed to follow that. And you don't know how, you don't have to know all the ways rationally that this can help your life, but eventually these actually acts of goodness and expansiveness and charity will end up really improving your life and really making you feel much more fulfilled and content with who you are. Remember, Jupiter also represents goodness, and goodness that can be in any kind of way, on any level, and just feeling good about yourself will improve your life in more ways than one. This rule speaks to this kind of aspects of Jupiter that just comes as a sudden inspiration, sudden aha moment. Even if it's not about charity, it can just be, you're just minding your own business, doing something very routine, very random, and then all of a sudden you would get a little bit of a crazy idea. Even though you might not be able to act on it right away, it would be good for you to get into the habit of taking a note of that, either like taking a voice memo or like writing down in your notepad on your app on your phone. Just basically take a note of that idea. You will look at that after a month. You can jot it down, forget about it, and look at it a month from now, and you you will be amazed at how actually intelligent or creative this thought that came to you was. And it's in these kinds of bursts of inspiration, in these decisive moments, that you can really dramatically transform your life. I think this is also where we get the whole idea of love at first sight. We see it in movies, but it happens also in real life. Sometimes we just see a person and something instantly clicks. It doesn't have to be rationally explained. It can just be something that your much wiser subconscious mind is already telling you that there is something special there. There's the next level of growth awaiting for you in your life, and you're supposed to follow that. There are just so many examples of this. We know so many people who say, I was married to this person, I was unhappy for years, I was depressed and didn't even realize how unhappy I was. And just in one moment, I just looked at my wife or husband, whatever, and just suddenly I knew it's time to leave them. Their life changes forever. So we really shouldn't ignore these subconscious impulses that reach the level of our conscious mind, and we really need to act on them, because if we ignore them, if we get into the habit of ignoring them, dismissing them as weird, irrational, random, we really lose out on a lot of richness that Jupiter is trying to offer into our life. The second lesson from Jupiter about how to be happier and more abundant in our lives is to utilize as much as possible our creativity. What do we mean by that? Obviously, there are a lot of professions and certain crafts that are associated with creativity, like drawing, painting, singing, writing. These are supposed to be creative professions and they're acknowledged as such. However, I really think this is a very limited view of creativity. I think as human beings, we're infinitely creative. Our potential is completely unlimited, and we can bring creativity into every single thing that we do, from organizing your closet to having a white collar job that is in the corporate space. We really have so many ways that we can utilize our innate skills, innate abilities to put our creative spin really on everything that we do. For example, my Jupiter is in the sign of Taurus, and so one of the ways that I get so happy and so creative is in the kitchen. You know, I love preparing food. I love creating new flavors. I love utilizing new recipes that I've come across, and I'm just curious what's going to come out of this. And I really put a lot of love and creativity into it. I love experimenting with different spices, with different ingredients. It's such a labor of love for me to prepare a meal for someone else. So depending again which sign your Jupiter is in and which house it's in, you can also get some further insights, but you don't have to know where your Jupiter is. The rule is basically to not shy away from freely, as much as possible, expressing your creativity in every aspect of your existence. And as we saw, creativity is one of the things ruled by Jupiter, and the more we practice that in our daily life, the better we become at the things that we are innately creative with, the more happiness and fulfillment we derive, and the better we become at something. So Venus is another planet that is about enjoyment, and everyone knows that Venus also represents a lot of beauty, a lot of abundance in life. But the difference between the enjoyment of Venus and the enjoyment of Jupiter is that Venus allows us to enjoy the things from the outside. We get nourished from things that come from outside. With Jupiter is kind of the opposite. Jupiter is about expressing what is within into the outer world. That's why it rules creativity, because creativity is about taking something within and manifesting it into the external world. Ultimately, we derive much more happiness and fulfillment from Jupiterian activities than from Venusian activities. I mean, think about it. What do you think will give you more fulfillment? Being inspired to write a novel, spending years creating that novel, putting all of your creative abilities, all of your love and inspiration into it, and then finally releasing it onto the market for people to enjoy and take advantage of, or going and buying a dress. Shopping is ruled by Venus. Dining at a restaurant is ruled by Venus. Eating a meal is ruled by Venus. Venus can give us a lot of satiation and enjoyment, but it never really lasts long. How long do you feel happy after a restaurant meal? This is one of the reasons why there is so much disconnect and frustration in the world nowadays, because we've created such a strong consumerist culture. Everything is about enjoyment of the senses. Everything is about kind of satiating a hunger to consume something. And there is just such an abundance of that, right? How many things can we really consume in our current day and age? Inevitably, we find out that the more we consume, it doesn't really bring us lasting fulfillment, lasting contentment. True contentment comes when we bring our gifts out into the world. This can really be seen through astrology because Venus is exalted in a sign of Jupiter, right? Venus is exalted in Pisces, which is a Jupiterian sign. So our enjoyment of things, our relationships are really taken to the next level of fulfillment when we get to the stage of Jupiter. Conversely, Jupiter suffers in Venusian signs. Jupiter is not particularly happy in the signs of Libra and Taurus because it's trying to derive lasting contentment and fulfillment through things which are external. Venus rules external enjoyments, things that we can get from the outside world, including other people. And it just never really works. In a nutshell, Venus is about enjoyment and Jupiter is about fulfillment. Imagine that you're attending a concert. Who do you think is getting more fulfillment from that concert? The artist who's performing or the viewers? It might at first sight seem that the viewers are getting more out of it. They don't have to work, they don't have to worry about anything, they can just forget about their obligations and responsibilities. They don't have to think about anything, they can just enjoy the beautiful music. And it's true, for a few hours, while the concert lasts, it's really an amazing experience. But the performer gets to enjoy the fulfillment of having that experience for the rest of their life because they took something that was coming out of them, some creative impulse. They were able to hone their skills in a particular area that they love and bring joy to thousands of people that attended the concert. And the happiness, the contentment, the fulfillment that comes from that cannot be compared to a few hours of enjoyment of a music that you really like. It really reminds me of a concert I attended a couple of months ago. It was a Vivaldi concert. It was such a beautiful performance. And I could see how much fun the musicians were having. Like they were just having the time of their life, just imagining how fulfilling, how much contentment they must be experiencing right now from knowing that they worked for years to perfect their craft and they can work in tandem with each other in this collaborative project and then bring something that brings happiness to so many other people. And it just brought me tears of joy and happiness just witnessing that. And in that moment, I thought, okay, as much as I'm enjoying this concert, as much as I'm enjoying this beautiful music, I bet that the musicians are enjoying it even more. So that's kind of the difference between Venus and Jupiter. Venus can make us very fulfilled and happy for a limited amount of time. The Venus enjoyment never really lasts too long, and it never reaches that profound level of ultimate happiness and bliss. That can really be reached only through activities related to Jupiter. The next advice from Jupiter on how to have a more fulfilled and creative life is to focus on your own path. So what do we mean by that? There is such a concept in astrology, in Vedic astrology, called Digbala, which is translated as directional strength. And what it means is that each planet is strongest in certain houses in the chart. For each planet, that's a different house, and it represents the areas where this planet can perform at its best. So for Jupiter, this house is the first house. So Jupiter has its highest directional strength in the first house and the lowest directional strength in the opposite, which is the seventh house. Now, the first house is us, our unique life path, our unique authentic nature. First house is basically the path that we're traversing on this path of life. The first house is our physical body, us. Seventh house, the opposite of that, is everyone else. Other people, relationships, partnerships with others, having an audience, everything that's kind of juxtaposed to you. Jupiter is weakest in the seventh house and strongest in the first house. So what does that tell us? It tells us that when it comes to things like creativity, wisdom, and abundance, if we really want to be fulfilled, if we really want to follow the wisdom of Jupiter, we need to start always with our authentic nature, our dharmic path. What are we really put on this earth for? And really it starts with self-exploration, with being strong enough to be independent thinker, independent doer. Really try to understand what makes me happy. What is the thing that I personally like? And what would be the thing that I like, even if it's unpopular, even if nobody else is doing it, even if nobody's going to like me or respect me for that? Again, the lowest directional strength Jupiter has is in the seventh house. So if we try to live our life based on other people's rules, if we try to do what works for others without really consulting with our authentic nature, we might be led astray and we might end up feeling very bitter and very unfulfilled, because what might be the recipe for happiness and fulfillment and prosperity for one person might be a disaster for another person. Let's take an example of two women. One woman is absolutely happy and fulfilled being a homemaker. She spends all of her life devoted to her family relations, creating a close-knit community for all of her relatives, having 3-4 children, for example, devoting herself to making a beautiful home for herself and her children, homeschooling them, etc. And you can just see that this woman is absolutely happy and fulfilled and content with her life. But this woman going into, let's say that she has 4 daughters, and this woman telling all of her 4 daughters that this is the recipe for happiness, this is not the right way, okay? Because what makes you happy won't necessarily make other people happy. Conversely, maybe one of her daughters comes alive when she's studying the stock market, when she's reading finance books, when she's, advising people on how to improve their budgets and finances. All her creative juices start flowing, all her intelligence comes alive, and she really feels at her most powerful, most creative self in the sphere of finance, okay? And so for this woman, absolute bliss would be having the freedom to pursue a career in an area that makes her more creative. So this is the lesson here of Jupiter. Always start with yourself. Focus on yourself. Don't think about what others will say, what others will think. Oh, I should do this profession because everyone else is doing it these days, because this is the profession du jour. This is the career that is most profitable in 2025. This is really a recipe for disaster, because for anything to work for us, we need to devote a lot of energy and time to it. We need to awaken our creativity, put our special, unique mark on it. And this is impossible if we're doing something that we're not inspired to do, if we're in an area that we're pursuing only because it's popular or convenient or practical, without it really being aligned with our soul nature. So if you want a more fulfilled life, try as much as possible to silence the opinion of others when it comes to what is really your dharmic path. The 4th lesson of Jupiter, in order to have more happiness in our lives, is to be connected to something bigger than ourselves. So in order for us to be more content, we need to have a sense of belonging, of connection to something that transcends our mundane and self-centered desires and needs. So why do humans crave connection to something bigger? It all starts with the separation trauma. In earthly existence, separation trauma occurs inevitably when the baby is born on Earth, because that baby used to be part of the mother's organism and they were basically intimately connected. As soon as the baby is born, it starts crying, right? It's basically separated from something that it was formerly part of. And that's a huge trauma to the organism and to the consciousness. And the reason why that happens is because as above, so below. Our earthly experiences mimic the separation we have from the divine whole. The reason why humanity is always looking for something to be part of, something to be connected to, the reason why religions have been such a big part of human civilization, and why unfortunately humanity has committed huge atrocities and huge sacrifices for the sake of our religion, is because religion allows us to feel that we're connected to something much bigger than ourselves, and for its sake we're able to go very big distances. Essentially, what we're lacking is a true connection to the divine, a sense of being connected to everyone and everything. This kind of separation that we experience psychologically, even though we might not realize it, is actually the source of a lot of our unhappiness. And so the more we can create something in our lives that we're connected to, the more we can contribute to that, the happier and more fulfilled and more connected we're going to feel. And essentially Jupiter is exalted in the sign of Cancer. Cancer is the sign of the moon, and moon is the planet of nourishment and connection. Moon is how we connect to other human beings on an intimate, emotional and psychological level. So Jupiter, the planet of happiness, finds its ultimate manifestation in the sign of the moon, in the sign of emotional and psychological connection. So the more we can create that kind of sense of connection, the happier we will feel long term. And I think it's something that we all intuitively know, that when we're part of something bigger than ourselves, it makes us feel happier and safer. And this can be anything. We don't have to be limited to religion. We don't have to be limited to like a local community. You know, back in the day, in human civilization, traditionally what people have created as a place to belong to, as a place to feel part of something bigger, traditionally that has been relatives. So having like a big family line that we continue feeling like we're part of this lineage. It can be a local community. It can be patriotism, like belonging to a certain country, belonging to a certain ethnos, a certain religion. Humanity is always looking for ways to connect. And this is why I'm saying the separation trauma impacts all of us, even though we might not realize it at first. So it can be anything. There are no rules about what is the right thing to be connected to. It can be, you know, for astrologers like me, studying astrology, being devoted to understanding ancient wisdom, contributing to the community of astrology is something that is bigger than me and creates a sense of connection for me and for fellow astrologers. For people who love football, they feel that they're part of this community. Why do you think they go to stadiums, right? Of course, it's fun to go to a stadium. It's fun to watch a game, but there is a certain emotion that you feel as a fan of a particular sports club when you see them live, and it's not just the players, it's the other fans. Yeah, they create that kind of sensation of belonging to something bigger, of being part of something larger than life. Again, it can be absolutely anything as long as it's, again, connected to your authentic nature. So follow your kind of natural inclinations. If you feel creative in a certain area, if you feel inspired, don't be afraid to understand what it is, this larger context that you can be connected to. I think one of the reasons why current generations are in some ways profoundly unhappy, profoundly discontented, is because we're very disconnected. We feel that on an intimate level, on an intuitive level, because being connected digitally, it creates a certain sense of belonging, but I don't think it's sufficient for us as human beings, especially nowadays with the power of algorithms. You know, social media has these kinds of ways technologically to connect you to things that it knows you will be interested in based on things that you've already watched, things that you've liked, etc., etc. But what ends up happening is every person has their own kind of personalized little bubble that they are encapsulated in. They keep like watching these things. They think that everyone is watching that everyone is informed about the things that they're informed about, but they're not. And the realization of that in real life creates a feeling of separation with others, a feeling of not belonging, a feeling of being misunderstood. I remember when I was a child, things were a little bit different. There was a certain culture, both local and global culture. There were very limited media back in the day through which we were informed about what's going on. And because we all watched the exact same things, and the thing that was popular in one country was often popular also in another country. Now think of Madonna, think of Michael Jackson, think of Hollywood movies, Hollywood actors. Basically, whatever table you sit at a restaurant and you start talking about the topic of today, everyone would know what you're talking about. And that created a certain societal connectedness through our culture that I think is very difficult to recreate nowadays. And so I think that's one of the downsides of this kind of hyper-personalized digital experience. So the advice here is basically find something that you're passionate about, find something that you're genuinely interested in, something that you're good at, and connect to other people who are interested in the same thing. Create that kind of community or connect to a platform that already exists and nurture that give and take. You know, consume things that are created by others in the community, but don't be afraid to also contribute to that community. And you will foster and you will harness that kind of sense of connectedness that will create a sense of fulfillment inspired by Jupiterian qualities. Another reason why this sense of belonging, sense of connectedness to something bigger than us is such a beautiful thing is that it allows us to better weather the storms of life. Life will inevitably bring its challenges. In everyday life, we will experience successes and failures, ease and difficulty, ups and downs in life. And when we are connected to something bigger than ourselves, it really helps us weather the storm of life. Also, having that kind of connection gives us a sense of purpose, which is another thing ruled by Jupiter, and feeling this kind of innate sense of purpose is one of the most profound ways to feel happier. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people find their meaning in life in their children, in their immediate family, because again, Jupiter rules children, and having children, being devoted to your children, knowing that you don't just live for yourself, you also live for the sake of providing a better life and happier life for your children, it gives you that strength to withstand the test of time. And so many people have said that, they went through difficulties, but having children and being responsible for these children really inspired them, let's say, to quit alcohol, to eat better, to not give up on their financial aspirations, any kind of area of life that they either had to overcome a challenge or be inspired to be better and better. They use that kind of sense of belonging or that sense of commitment to their children or partner or anything to really push them to grow further and to not give up even when times are tough. The next thing we can implement into our lives in order to be happier and more fulfilled is to emphasize giving rather than just taking. And this kind of overlaps with some of the previous things we discussed, but it really deserves its own point because I think people really, again, we live in a consumerist culture in more ways than one. And I think people really get this illusion that the more we get, the more we consume, the more we take from others, the happier and more fulfilled we're going to be. And I really don't think this is a recipe for lasting happiness. It's truly when we learn the art and the beauty of giving that we feel truly replenished. And any time that you give out of yourself, especially when it's aligned with your dharmic path, with your innate talents and skills, it gives you a sense of fulfillment. Jupiter rules the sign of Pisces. Pisces is about unconditional love, about charity, about devotion, about giving without any expectation of a return. Venus is the planet of give and take. Venus is the planet that basically makes sure that relationships are balanced. That's why it's depicted by a scale, because things have to be balanced. And it's true, in relationships with other people, if things get too much off balance, they can't really be sustainable. But when it comes to Jupiter, our sense of fulfillment, belonging, and connectedness, we should try to nurture that skill of giving without any thought or expectation of getting anything in return. Each planet rules a certain age period of our life. Jupiter is the planet that rules the ages of 32 to 50. And this is really the age in which ideally we need to learn the lessons of giving and contribution. And you will notice that people who are unable to learn how to do that, who are used to just taking and expecting rewards for everything that they do, they start getting a little bit dissatisfied and depressed at a certain point in their lives because it just feels like it's not enough. Really, the Jupiterian age between 32 and 50 is the time where we really decide, okay, what do I want to contribute to? What do I want to give my energy, skills, resources to in order to be more fulfilled and in order to create a better life for others, a better world in some way. And again, this is why so many people during that age are very devoted to their children, because they find out that actually it's in giving, in the energy of giving rather than taking and expecting, that they find the ultimate joy. A really good example of that is Angelina Jolie, who was born essentially as a Nepo baby. Her father in his prime was a very famous, very successful Hollywood actor. So you will find pictures of Angelina Jolie as a child or as a teenager attending these galas and red carpet Hollywood events. And so imagine someone who was born into all that privilege, into all that elite environment where she had all the right connections, the material resources. On top of everything else, she was born physically very beautiful. And still, throughout her 20s, she struggled a lot with addictions, with mental health issues. She just really wasn't profoundly happy. It's only when she found the joy of contributing and giving to charities that she really started coming into her strength and into her larger than life beauty, because she essentially tapped into that Jupiterian energy within her. Luckily for her, Jupiter is very well placed in her chart. Look how much joy she is deriving from her children. She mentions them in all of her interviews. It's basically when she started working for United Nations, working with refugees, devoting herself to humanitarian causes, adopting children and taking care of them, providing them with a beautiful life, that she really felt at her happiest. And I think in all her interviews, she says that if you ask her what makes her happiest, sure, it's the creative process of acting, which is also represented by Jupiter, but it's really what she loves most about her life is being in the position to contribute significantly to causes that she's passionate about. So tapping into that giving energy really learning, honing the skill of giving rather than receiving or expecting things in return will ultimately make you happy and more fulfilled. The next lesson Jupiter has for us is to cultivate joy and happiness for the sake of joy and happiness without any conditions necessary. This sounds a little bit like circular logic at first, and I really don't want this to sound like toxic positivity. I'm not trying to discount the challenges or the difficult aspects of life on Earth. I am very, very aware that different people live in different circumstances, and even the same people throughout their lives, they have moments where things are just really not conducive to them feeling happy and fulfilled, and occasions where things are kind of working in their favor, so it's easier for them to harness that kind of happiness. But I think we really underestimate the power of our minds here, and we really forget about the fact that if we really want to, if we really work on it, we can cultivate a habit of feeling joyful from the small things in life, joyful despite the difficulties, joyful because we might see the problematic areas in our life, but we're also not simultaneously blind to all the blessings we have in our lives, all the good things, all the things that are working out. And I think because we have such an intelligent and problem-solving mind as human beings, we have the tendency to over-focus on the things that are not working out because we're very progressive as human beings. We want to improve on things. We want to solve problems. We want to overcome challenges. That's a beautiful thing. We don't need to lose the sense of progressiveness in order to be happy. But Jupiter is telling us, look around you. Don't be blind to the beautiful things in life just because this one or two particular things might not be working out in the way that you want to. So Jupiter, one of the manifestations and representations of Jupiter is Jiva, which is the living soul, the sentient being. So all living beings on Earth have Jiva within them. And essentially the purpose of Jupiter is to continue life. That's why it rules conception, it rules children, because the point of life is really for us to be alive. I mean, a lot of people, including myself, we've spent so long looking for the purpose in life. The reality is that objectively there isn't really a higher purpose in life, in the sense that I think if we really were meant to have a specific purpose, it would be very obvious and inescapable. If really the purpose of life was one particular concrete thing, we would have no way of avoiding that, right? But the reality is that whatever your spirituality is telling you, whatever your philosophy is teaching you, the only thing that we know for a fact, without any kind of imagination being put into it, without any conjecture, is that we're born and then we pass on when it comes to our physical existence. These are the facts, that at a certain point we're born on Earth, we're alive for a specific period of time, and then we pass away. These are the facts of life. And so really the purpose of life is to experience life. That's literally the only main real purpose, is to just experience life. That's why you will find that in so many cultures and spiritual teachings, taking your own life is considered a very big crime, just as murder is taking the life of someone else, and it carries a very heavy burden of karma to cut off that jiva, that life source, because ultimately we're here on Earth to experience life on Earth. The divine consciousness is experiencing itself through all of us in different ways, in different manifestations in 3D reality. So really the purpose of life is to be alive. So Jupiter is asking us here to learn to cultivate happiness and joy just because we're alive. Again, I'm not implying that it's always and for everyone as easy to be happy with our circumstances as it is for everyone else. I'm just saying that the lesson from Jupiter here is to understand that as long as you're living on Earth, you're doing a good job, okay? Your job here really is to just continue living. And when it's time to pass on, it's time to pass on. That's something that ultimately is out of our control. But the more we can harness this kind of living energy, the more we can live life to the full, the more we can appreciate the gift that it is to be alive, the happier and more joyful we're going to be. So again, even though it might sound a little bit bizarre, a little bit like toxic positivity, I'm inviting you to look at things from a slightly different perspective here and ask yourself, am I really in the habit of making myself miserable more than I need to be? When something bad happens, what is my inner dialogue? Am I punishing myself even more? So basically the outer circumstance comes and punishes me, let's say, or makes me miserable in a certain way. Is my inner dialogue, the thing that happens in my consciousness, is that contributing to more or less joy? Am I in the habit of seeing the glass as half full or half empty, and really challenge yourself to examine your inner dialogue and see, okay, well, if I really want to, can I try to be more joyful? Can I try to be more grateful and happy? The next lesson Jupiter has for us in order to cultivate more happiness in our life is to be open to expanding our horizons, to learning new things, and to be open to teachers and teachings everywhere around us. So this really stems from the fact that Jupiter rules Sagittarius, which is the ninth sign. Ninth house, as we know, is the house of philosophy, of morality, of idealism, and higher learning, really. So when we say higher learning, we mean the teaching that goes beyond practical skills and fundamentals behind each science. It's taking that knowledge to the next level towards true understanding and wisdom. And Sagittarius, as we know, is a sign about philosophy, about learning, about expanding our horizons, about adventures, understanding lessons from other people, lessons from foreign cultures, anything that can push the envelope on our understanding, knowledge, and wisdom. So Jupiter here is telling us, stay open to new understanding, to new teachings. Never close yourself off to the potential of learning something new, to expanding your horizons. Never approach life with the idea of narrow-mindedness, with the sense of pride and arrogance that you already know everything and there is nothing new to learn. Because actually, Jupiter rules teachers, but it doesn't have to be literally from teachers, people who have the profession of teachers. I think every person and every experience can teach us something. So Jupiter teaches us really to see the teaching and the wisdom and everything around us. And Jupiter, in fact, rules understanding. So not just acquiring knowledge, but really having understanding. Those are two very different things, 10 people can attend a lecture, and each of the 10 people will derive a different kind of wisdom and understanding from what the teacher taught them. When the student is ready, the teacher arrives. Again, a teacher, having the right teacher in your life, the right guru in your life, can really contribute to your happiness, to the expansion of your mind. And I've experienced this. It's such a beautiful thing. Once I devoted myself to astrology, I started studying with Ernst Wilhelm, and the amount of joy and bliss that I've experienced with his teachings is beyond anything I've experienced before. So I'm very grateful for that. But again, I was only able to derive that knowledge because my consciousness was at the certain stage that I was ready to absorb that knowledge from him. So again, when the student is ready, the teacher will come. I was actually aware of the existence of this teacher and his teachings and books many years before I devoted myself to his teachings, because I just wasn't ready. My mind wasn't there yet. The ninth house also rules wisdom and respect. It also rules the parental unit. And one of the first things we are taught as children is to respect our parents. And why is that? Because until we learn to be open to the teachings of others, we can't really become wise within ourselves. Sure, we need to follow our own philosophy. I'm not saying to blindly trust everything that we hear. Again, we always have to filter everything to the prism of our own inner understanding, our own dharmic path and self-knowledge. But at least we need to be open to hearing that. Actually, Jupiter rules sounds. When we agree with something, when we agree with a certain teaching or idea, what do we say? We say, this sounds good. So Jupiter rules sounds, and it rules the sense of hearing. Basically, we need to be open to listening. This reminds me of that term, askhole, which is basically people who keep asking and asking for advice, asking for help, sharing their problems, asking you for tips. And in the end, whatever you tell them, they never actually follow your advice. So it's like, why do you even ask me if you're never going to even try to absorb any of the knowledge that I'm passing on to you? The lesson of Jupiter here is to be open and receptive to knowledge from any kind of source. Again, wisdom and knowledge can come from anywhere. It can come from nature. It can come from animals, from a movie, from a book that we read, from the grocery store, from the wisdom and beauty of how our neighbor treats us. There really is, again, no limit, because Jupiter is about expansion, about vastness. It's the biggest planet. It's the heaviest planet. There is no limit to the knowledge we can derive. And again, it's more about understanding the knowledge, because someone can present you with all the right knowledge, but unless your consciousness is ready to absorb it and to integrate it, that knowledge will be useless to you. You can't force these things. It comes to you when it comes to you. But essentially, the lesson of Jupiter here is never close yourself off to knowledge from any particular source, and never never allow pride and arrogance and narrow-mindedness to close you off from wisdom, because literally one idea can be the difference between poverty and abundance. One idea can completely transform and change your life. The ninth house is considered one of the lucky houses. So why do you think in astrology the house of luck is the same house as the house of wisdom and philosophy, right? Because the wiser we become, the more aware we are of the wisdom and knowledge around us, the luckier we become, right? It's not really luck in the magical sense. It's because we're wise enough to take advantage of the opportunities, knowledge, and wisdom that we have available to us. The next thing we can implement in our lives in order to see more and more fulfillment, abundance, and happiness is to, quote unquote, speak worthwhile things only. What do we mean by that? On the one hand, Jupiter, as we saw, rules gurus and teachers, and we associate gurus and teachers with speaking a lot and conveying a lot of information to their students. Also, Jupiter is known as the Lord of Speech, the Lord of Eloquence, and the Lord of Prayer. So Jupiter rules speech that has power and importance. At the same time, in Vedic astrology, Jupiter is known as the guru that doesn't speak much. So he's actually quiet a lot of the times. He doesn't speak in vain. These two things seem at first glance to be in conflict with each other. But essentially what Jupiter is teaching us is to speak, and to speak kindly and beautifully, but only when it's worthwhile to speak. Always asking ourselves, am I speaking with kindness? Am I speaking something worth listening to? Am I speaking with wisdom and knowledge? Is what I'm saying helpful? Is what I'm saying kind? Is it beneficial, right? These are the three rules: truthful, beneficial, and kind. Remember that Jupiter also represents truth. So one of the big things in a lot of spiritual teachings is to not lie. Lying is actually considered to incur a lot of karmic debt. Even white lies are in many religions supposed to be a sin, something that has a karmic burden associated with it. So we need to stick to the truth as much as possible. At the same time, we need to try to be kind and empathetic and forgiving of people, of course. And we need to try to be beneficial. What we say, is it actually of use to the other person? Is it productive? Is it meaningful? If not, maybe it's better to keep to ourselves. And there's a couple of other reasons why speaking is something that we need to be considerate about and calculate with in a way. First of all, on a very practical level, we can get in a lot of trouble when we say the wrong thing, right? When we say lies, the lies can catch up with us and people can lose their trust in us. It breaks loyalty, it breaks bonds. Saying something rude can really hurt someone's feelings. It can really sever the connection with someone if we say something unkind, if we say something untruthful. Also, if we say something in vain, something that we should have kept to ourselves. Think the song of Depeche Mode, Policy of Truth, right? Sometimes it's really better to keep things to ourselves because we can really put our foot in our mouth, as the expression goes, and cause ourselves and other people a lot of trouble. So on a very practical level, there are benefits sometimes to really making sure you speak only when it's the right thing to say and the right time to say it. But on a more spiritual level, there are a lot of yogic and spiritual practices that have to do with silence. Taking a vow of silence, going to these kind of retreats where you're committed to being quiet for a certain period of time. And that actually is a very liberating and enlightening feeling. Why? Because by not speaking, first of all, we're retaining a lot of our energy. It's said in a lot of spiritual movements that speaking incurs a lot of energy from us. And so retaining that energy helps us direct that spiritual energy into other avenues like meditation, like connection with God, connection with the divine, deriving wisdom from our subconscious mind, being closer to our intuition. But also it enables self-reflection, right? We can't really self-reflect or reflect on any kind of situation in a meaningful, deep, profound way unless we are quiet within ourselves. So really quieting the mouth, but also quieting the mind in order to get to that next level of wisdom and self-understanding and self-knowledge. Being calculated, being measured in our speech is a very important component of having a more fulfilled life. Also, a lot of ways people utilize speech is to speak badly of others, it's to criticize, it's to complain, it's to gossip. And we all know that doesn't contribute to anyone's happiness, really. There is no amount of gossip that will ever truly make you fulfilled or improve your life in any meaningful way. If anything, again, it can contribute negatively to the world and to your own psychology and fulfillment with life. So this is something that we can all kind of ask ourselves, including me. I have the tendency to speak a bit too much sometimes in social situations because I don't want the other person to be uncomfortable by some kind of awkward silence. And I think that's probably a bad habit, even though I'm coming from a good place. Talking on and on without like a certain level of quietness, of a pause, it's not really beneficial for anyone. So I think we can all reflect on our own speech patterns and our own conversing skills and think to ourselves, do I speak in vain? Do I have the habit of speaking of things which are unproductive, that are not beneficial to anybody, don't bring any new knowledge, anything productive to the discussion? Do I have the habit of speaking kindly or unkindly? Do I have the habit of complaining and gossiping, which really doesn't help anything whatsoever? So this is really the lesson here of Jupiter. And I've written here, complete silence in some yoga practices isn't about repression. It's about cultivating presence, conserving vital energy, and creating space for inner transformation. You know, there is a reason why certain practices are common and practiced throughout different religions, and we really need to reflect on the purposes of that. Another lesson for having more happiness in our lives through the lessons of Jupiter is to adopt some of the Jupiterian qualities, and they are acceptance and understanding, forgiveness, compassion, and wisdom. And these are overall quite self-explanatory, of course, but I want to expand a little bit on that and tell you exactly how you can implement that in your daily life. First of all, forgiveness and compassion. People struggle a lot with forgiving others, and ultimately that's because we also struggle with forgiving ourselves. To forgive is essentially to acknowledge that nobody is perfect. Forgiveness is to separate from the idea that there is such a thing as perfection and absolute goodness. It simply doesn't exist in our current world, in the human nature, anywhere really. We live in a world of duality, and so to harness the qualities of Jupiter in the sense of compassion and forgiveness is to extend that level of understanding and forgiveness towards others as we do to ourselves. So being able to forgive ourselves, being able to look at all the flaws in our nature and in the nature of others, all the ways in which people fall short of an ideal, and be okay with that and forgive them for that. Because essentially, if we're unable to forgive a certain person in our life, and that doesn't mean we need to accept them back into our lives. I'm not saying that you should get together with your toxic ex just because you forgive them. The point of forgiveness and grace is to lighten the load that we place on ourselves by holding others and ourselves to unrealistic standards. Forgiveness comes when we acknowledge, and this usually comes with time. I think as people get older, they realize that other people are never going to be perfect. The world is never going to be perfect. We ourselves are very far from perfect. And the older the person gets, the more they come to terms with that. And with that comes that kind of realization that we should kind of forgive other people and ourselves for falling short of perfection. This comes again under the umbrella of the significations of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the archer who basically has a goal in mind, a high ideal in mind. The archer is always depicted looking ahead and upwards, right? Because the archer is looking to that higher goal, something to lift them up to a next level of expansion in life, to an ideal that will uplift humanity. But one of the lessons of Sagittarius is that if we work towards an ideal, we will inevitably fall short of that. And we need to be okay with that. Because if we dwell on not forgiving, if we dwell on frustration and bitterness about things falling short of perfection, inevitably we will live a life of bitterness and frustration and profound unhappiness. So this is what we mean by harnessing the qualities of Jupiter. It's kind of having that wisdom to appreciate that everything in life is imperfect. Everything has an element of duality in it. We need to forgive ourselves and others for falling short of our ideals of perfection, our standards of morality or whatever other qualities that we associate with goodness in life. And another aspect of that is the fact that Jupiter as a planet looks in all directions. This is something that I don't want to go too much into detail about because it's the topic of another video, but essentially each planet looks at the world in different ways, and Jupiter as a planet is said to look in all directions. And what does that mean? It means that Jupiter as the wise one, as the all-seeing one, the guru, the spiritually enlightened guru, is able to see everything, the whole of life, the wholeness of life, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, the dirty and the clean, dirty and pure, whatever. The wisdom of Jupiter comes from acknowledging that, again, nothing in life is perfect, but we can choose what to focus on. Again, Sagittarius has a goal. Sagittarius is the mula trikona sign of Jupiter. Just because we might fall short of our ideals doesn't mean we stop striving towards a better future. So the wisdom of the Guru Jupiter really comes in the fact that we should acknowledge the complexity of life. We should acknowledge the wholeness of human existence, the duality of human nature, be accepting and forgiving of the fact that not everything is going to be perfect, and there will be a lot of elements of life and people which are cruel, unkind, you name it. So having the wisdom to acknowledge those imperfections, but still not giving up on trying to do good, on trying to get better and better at something, on trying to strive for a higher ideal. You can take any prominent guru throughout the history of humanity as an example, and you will see that even though they offer forgiveness and compassion and understanding to humanity, we can take Jesus Christ, for example. He acknowledges the imperfections in human nature. He doesn't care that humans are cruel or imperfect towards him. He loves everyone anyway, so he has that kind of unconditional love, which again is ruled by Pisces, which is a Jupiterian sign. At the same time, even though these gurus acknowledge the imperfections in human nature, that doesn't mean that they use that as an excuse to commit atrocities, to do horrible things, to be cruel towards others. Not at all, right? What do gurus usually do? They try to be kind, they try to be patient, they try to be charitable. So this is the essence of the Sagittarius aspect of the Jupiterian qualities. It's basically understanding that you can never reach the highest of your ideals. You will always fall short of your moral inclinations, ideas, ambitions, and goals. However, that doesn't need to be used as an excuse to not do better and to not try to strive for a better ideal. So I think this is where the beauty of Jupiter really comes into play, because it's kind of a blend of the Piscean qualities of forgiveness and charity and compassion and lack of judgment, combined with the idealism of Sagittarius. You will see these prominent figures, spiritual enlightened beings that have the wisdom to understand the duality of the world, the duality of the human nature, all the possible ways in which humans can be cruel and unkind and you name it. But they also see the beauty and they appreciate the beautiful aspects of existence, the beautiful and kind and compassionate aspects of human nature. And still, Sagittarius strive towards something higher, something bigger and better, a higher ideal. Despite acknowledging and accepting the flaws in others, they still try to be better themselves. So this is basically a way in which we can expand our life towards better visions and more forgiveness and more happiness in our life by having that kind of juxtaposition of perfection and imperfection and reconciling that through our wisdom. The final lesson I have for you when it comes to improving our contentment and happiness in life by adopting the lessons of Jupiter has to do with our attitude towards change, namely seeing change as grace. So first of all, Jupiter is the fifth planet. The Sun is considered the first planet, the Moon is considered to be the second, Mars the third, Mercury the fourth, Jupiter the fifth, Venus the sixth, and Saturn the seventh planet. And so what does that mean? The number 5 and the pentagram in mysticism and occult studies is traditionally associated with luck, with grace, and with prosperity. On the other hand, there is a bit of an imbalance there. It's an unstable number. You know, any kind of odd number has an element of conflict and challenge to it because it's not as stable as the even numbers, right? So the number 5 has to do with change. And change is never easy. Even when things change for the better, there is always a sense of discomfort there because ultimately as human beings, we like predictability. Our brain is wired to like stability, predictability, to feel safe when things are the same, essentially. That's why, unfortunately, we stay in a lot of toxic and unhealthy patterns because we fear change, because on a subconscious level, we're afraid of changing things, even if it's to change them for the better. So here, Jupiter is teaching us to embrace change because it has an element of grace in it. Additionally, Jupiter rules Pisces, and as we know, Pisces rules letting go, completions, and endings. It's the last sign, it's the 12th sign, the end of a cycle. And whenever there is change, there is saying goodbye to something, being done with something. That is always uncomfortable to human beings. That is always a little bit frightening, a little bit scary, a little bit uncomfortable. And so the lesson of Jupiter here is to always look for the positive in any change of circumstance. Even if on the surface that might mean the end of something beautiful, even if we don't want to say goodbye. And I'm not saying that we're supposed to instantly be happy and celebrate and be grateful for losing a job that we dearly loved, or losing a source of income, or losing a house. Any kind of ending, as I said, always comes with a sense of discomfort, but especially when it's on the surface a very negative type of change, it's very easy to fall into despair. So if we want to be happier in our life, we need to accept that there is a higher wisdom in the universe that guides us towards a different type of future, which is conducive to our growth. Jupiter is the planet of growth and expansion. It's the planet of adventure and expanding of horizons. And how can you expand your horizon if you don't change, if you don't let go of something, whether that's a habit, a paradigm, an old state of being? So the more comfortable we become with seeing change as a positive thing, even though initially it might seem like a negative thing, there are always lessons in that. And we need to kind of have a leap of faith here and try to trust the universe that probably the thing that is ending is ultimately for our highest good. Basically roll with the changes of life and not rebel against it, not kind of throw a hissy fit, and embrace it. It's a widely known fact in astrology that actually Jupiter can take a lot of things away from us. So even though it's the Great Benefic, it's supposed to be a very lucky, abundant, and expansive element of our charts, it doesn't always come easy. The change doesn't always come in a very smooth, easily digestible way. Sometimes Jupiter takes things away that we are very attached to in order to expand our level of consciousness. So the more we can adopt this kind of mindset of seeing the silver lining and seeing the potential in any changeable situation, the happier and more adaptable and content and at peace with ourselves and with life we're going to be. Because Jupiter sometimes takes things away from us. I had to experience something like that very recently in my life. It's a long story. I don't want to bore you with the details, but Jupiter took something away from me. I was in a period of Jupiter and I had to say goodbye to a career that I was pursuing for over 12 years, a career that I was relatively good at, but it ultimately never made me happy. It wasn't really aligned with my authentic soul's nature. Also, when Jupiter period came for me, I lost someone that I dearly loved, and it was a very devastating time. It was a very difficult time. But actually going through that pain taught me that life is short, taught me that we really have no time to waste. And since nothing really means anything because everything can end at any moment, it makes sense to align ourselves with what we truly desire, with what truly makes us happy. And I realized in that time that what truly makes me happy is studying astrology. Going through that tragedy in my life, going through that extreme pain, gave me the courage to say bye-bye to something that was ultimately unfulfilling because I felt like I had nothing to lose. I was already miserable. I was unhappy. I saw that life is too short to put up with situations that are not for our highest good and that are not ultimately aligned with our true purpose and nature. And that gave me the courage to embrace change. So again, change can come in many different forms and it can initially seem very destabilizing and even tragic at times, but never underestimate the grace of Jupiter because changes and endings can happen in your life for many different reasons. Maybe you're at a stage of your life when you've outgrown something that is comfortable but has reached its expiration date. Maybe we are attached to certain things that are not ultimately good for us. Changes can come when we're stagnating, when we're comfortable in a situation, but life has something even better, even more expansive and bigger in store for us. And also change can bring us into a state of contemplation because it's so easy to go with the flow of life and go into a state of inertia without actually stopping and asking ourselves the big question. And again, Jupiter is the planet of philosophy, of self-actualization and self-wisdom and knowledge. And unless we have something to shake us up from that comfort of continuity and inertia, we can't really ask ourselves the big questions of life. So there's so many ways in which change can be for our highest good. So the lesson here is to accept that maybe there are some things that you might not be aware of right now that are ultimately for your highest good. You're just not seeing it yet. And just leaning on to that faith in a higher intelligence, again, pride really gets in the way here, but we really need to have the faith that we don't have all the answers. We need to understand that right now we might not be aware of something that is in store for us, and only once we get on the other side of the change, we will understand why things happen the way they happen. So having that kind of faith and belief and optimism will really help you to ride the waves of change in your life. I really hope you enjoyed this video about the lessons of Jupiter. I actually used the material for this video a little bit as a self-learning tool because Jupiter is not particularly strong in my chart. It's not very damaged, but it's also not super strong. And so a lot of the lessons that I shared with you, I've had to learn them through a lot of years of conflict and frustration with myself, with the world around me. The more we can all learn from the wisdom of Jupiter, I think the more at peace and content we're going to feel. So I look forward to your feedback and your questions. If you have any suggestions for the next video, if you have any particular questions about astrology, never hesitate to ask me and to suggest in the comments. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye!